Well, welcome to Homeward. I'm Jim Burns. I'm smiling today because we have a very special guest. One of the bottom line goals of parenting, no matter what your child's age, is to help them, what I like to say, become responsible adults. Now, you may have a 2-year-old and you'll say, I'm not really thinking about responsible adulthood, but we should, okay? And the question is it possible to practice healthy discipline, creating character, developing responsibility, and changing behaviors? Well, the answer is a loud yes. It's not easy, but it takes work and some patience and training. And I'm going to add prayer and really a plan for healthy discipline and guidance. And I don't know about you, but there were times in my life when our kids were younger where I was just so tired, I just simply gave in. Okay, do it. I don't agree with it, but you do it. I didn't have the energy. Times when I wanted to, or even needed to be liked by them for some reason. And so I didn't do the discipline. There were loads of times Kathy and I were not on the same page. So sometimes it was just easier to punish without training them. Many of us were raised in what we call shame-based parenting. And how'd that work for you? It didn't work well, did it? And yet sometimes we go back to that. Well, my guest and why I'm smiling is we have Paige Clingenpeel with us today. Paige's podcast, which I love, is called Embracing Your Season, Parenting the Littles and Understanding Teens. And I say it's my favorite parenting podcast on the planet. And I mean that. I've said it about no other podcast. As a teen therapist and as a mom of 4 kids, she's married to Ryan. She manages to do a weekly podcast. She practices therapy as a counselor. She works on a staff at Pine Hills Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I listen to her podcast every week, and I marvel at her wisdom. So anyway, I'm so happy to have her. Plus, she has a likability factor that's off the charts. Her podcast is the sister podcast to this one. So today we're talking about healthy discipline, creating character, developing responsibility, changing behaviors. We can get all that done in this podcast. That's going to be awesome. Paige, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be with you. And as we talk about discipline today, and I think that's one of the main things that a lot of us have a need to talk about. We're
Mhm.
talking about healthy discipline of our kids. And I don't think there's a person on the planet who would say, well, this is easy. I totally have this part all down in my parenting. And if you're married, it's actually probably we say we're totally not on the same page at times when it comes to
Mhm.
discipline. I just realized I used the word Paige, and your name is Paige, but you get that, I'm sure.
I see
Um,
that,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Why do you think we have so much trouble in the area of being consistent with our discipline?
That is such a good question. I think it's a couple of reasons, in fact, that we're inconsistent. I think one is we're just overwhelmed.
Yeah,
You mentioned I'm a mama of 4, and I remember when my kids were little and the amount of noise and physical touch and
yeah,
just stimulus in my
yeah,
environment, I just became super reactive, to
yeah.
everything. And
Right,
so
right.
when a bad choice was made, I would react out of that frustration without even really thinking. And I think the additive to that, the other inconsistency that we have is that we don't fully understand what discipline can be for. So if we don't
Yeah,
have an understanding, then we're again going to be very
yeah,
reactive. So we go back to our family of origin and what did they do to discipline? Because we think, well, that's the only way to do it. But we're missing out on so many opportunities when we are just reactive and we don't have a plan in place. So
that's
that's why
good.
we have conversations like this.
No, that's so good. I mean, I can remember times you're talking about chaos, and I can remember times with Kathy. We had 3, you have 4. Wow. So our 3, it was just chaotic. And Kathy would go, "Hey, I'm going to go use the restroom," and then she'd be in the restroom, but she'd be in it for a long time. And I'm like, "Hey, babe, you okay?
Yes.
And you okay?" And there, "Oh no, I'm having a great time. I'm reading a magazine. I'm not even sitting on the toilet." I go, "Well, where are you?" "I'm sitting on the floor. It's just I
Oh,
needed some
Kathy, I get
peace."
it.
Yeah,
Yep, I get
but
it.
the funny thing that you just said was, as you're talking about discipline, we go back to our origins, whatever that was. I often times say on this podcast that communication is a learned trait, but discipline is a learned trait too. So we're going to learn a
Mhm.
lot from you. So I want to talk about discipline and punishment. Some people get that confused, and some people think discipline is punishment. So I want you to unpack the differences. You actually say punishment is not all bad, but it's not all good.
Yeah, yeah. So I know in our American language, we use those words interchangeably. I mean, it
Mhm.
is semantics, but
Sure.
I do believe that there's different modalities in how we implement punishment versus discipline. So, for instance, punishment, the main goal is to reduce or eliminate the behaviors that we deem as parents or society
Yeah.
as inappropriate. Now, that's not in a bad thing, right? We can all agree that we want our kids making wise choices.
Yeah,
However, the problem is that we focus too much on stopping the behavior that we don't actually have a teaching element that changes future decision making. See, that's where discipline comes in. The goal of discipline is to develop our child to learn self control, emotional regulation, and to make good choices. So when we focus instead on the teaching, think about how that transforms the way that we interact with our
that's really
kids,
good.
the way that it transforms their heart for future behaviors. I mean, we're still learning emotional regulation as adults. Can we help our kids learn that at a younger age? Think about how much easier and smoother, as well as just the life health their life will be because they're making wiser choices.
Well, and you used words like, teaching, training, coaching, tactical, and what you just said is that this is a training process, and it's kind of a lifelong training process, but while we have our kids for the, 20 years or whatever that they're in the house, some 18, what you're saying is that it's actually a training, like when the Bible talks about train up a child, that's really what you're talking about when it comes to discipline then.
So, what I love about just changing up the words, instead of
Mm,
using discipline, instead we talk about training or teaching, or I love the idea of coaching. Think about how that like switches up our paradigm and the way that we interact with our kids. So, I know you understand this too, Jim. My kids are in sports, so they've had different coaches, and I've been able to help my kids see the different style of coaching and how that impacts the way they make decisions. So, like one coach, for instance, they're punitive in the way that they have consequences. Their reactions are different depending on their moods. Then on the flip side, my other child has a coach who's directive, that instructs and allows natural consequences to
mm,
be the teacher.
mm,
The way my kids respond to each of those coaching
mhm.
styles is completely different. They
Yeah,
also want to please the coach that is teaching them and desiring for them to be better
mm,
in their decision making. Now, when we transform that into the way that we discipline, the way that we instruct, think about how that transforms even our inflection, our tone of voice, because now it's not, again, that punitive nature of punishment. It's teaching them you can be better, you can do better. So let's change the way that you interact in this circumstance moving forward.
no, that's really, really good. Now, give me a personal illustration, if you can, with out of your family on how you play that out with one of your kids.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I have several examples with my kiddos on how I can be a coach, for instance. Let me think of a good one where I don't shame myself too much. Because let's be honest, friends, like I can preach this so well for your kiddos, but when it comes into my own life,
Oh,
my kids are like, "Are you kidding? Like that doesn't work at all." So let me think through. Like words have a lot of power in our house. We try to really illustrate the fact that
mm,
I understand that you're reacting out of your frustration, but when you speak things over your siblings like you're stupid or you're dumb, like that's transformational. And so
mm,
I, instead of just yelling at my child that said those words, which I have in the past, let's be honest, like, don't you dare
sure.
say that. Don't speak
Yeah,
that. Instead, I take them aside and think, what do you think those words mean? Let's just define it. Okay, so now you've just called your brother an idiot or stupid. How do you think that translates into how he views himself? Of course, we have to take a second aside because if the child's still angry at their
yeah,
sibling,
yeah,
then they're not going to feel
yeah.
it and pick
Well,
it
he
up.
is stupid. He is an idiot.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds like you've been in my house. You know
Right,
how
right.
these
No, hey,
dialogues
my
go,
house too.
right?
Yeah.
But in this case, when you take the child aside, they've kind of de-escalated and they realize, man, I have spoken that identity over over their
Yeah,
sibling,
yeah,
and they can relate to that because then I
that's
recall
good.
for them, what's a time when you have had words spoken over you? So
Yeah,
now it's not again just punishing in that moment;
yeah,
it's teaching them empathy. It's helping them recognize
right,
self-control next time.
right, right.
The
That's
anger
good.
is okay. We know this biblically. The anger in itself is okay, right?
Yeah,
When you are angry, but the rest of the verse says, do not sin. So
yeah.
we need to be mindful. What
No,
are we doing to
no,
make
it's
sure?
a great illustration, and even adding, there were times, and I don't know that it always worked, but I would say, "Hey, so if I called you stupid or an idiot, how would you feel?" And,
Exactly.
I would get sometimes a response from my kids on that. It's a great illustration.
Mhm.
Okay, so in a talk that you gave recently, you used 3 R's of discipline. So that's remove, reflect, and reconnect. And I want you to unpack that philosophy: remove, reflect, reconnect. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah. So Mark Merrill is the one that came up with the 3 R's. And then I've taken this and I've kind of expounded it
Mhm.
because what I've found that a lot of parents respond to the remove from the stimulus. Like I think we all know to do that when our
Yeah,
kids are hitting each other or the name calling, right? We remove them and that takes
right,
care of the situation.
right.
But oftentimes parents stop there. And that's where I'm saying we are missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
We need to go deeper. And that's where the reflect and the reconnect happens. So
Mhm.
for the reflect, this is where parents get to be curious. They get to ask questions because every behavior that we see out of our child is rooted in something else. So there's a
So good.
motivation there. So maybe it's just pure defiance. Because let's be honest, sometimes kids just do things just because they're in that naughty season of life. Other times it's out of ignorance, or maybe they didn't sleep enough or eat enough. There's always a reason behind it. If we ask questions, we get to figure out what is the deeper reason behind this
Mm,
behavior. Then think about it. Then we're able to teach that. Then we're able to say, can you can do something different next time?
mm.
So once we reflect, then we're able to reconnect because our kids are really in this performance based season through school and sports and really just behaviorally. We get to come back to them and say, your performance does not equate your value.
Mm,
You can
mm.
make mistakes, but I still love you. And then we get to do something, and it's been on my podcast where people have spoken this, the ministry of presence.
Yeah.
Us just sitting with our kids and saying, hey, you made a bad choice. And there's going to be a natural consequence to that choice, but I still love you. And let's
Mhm.
talk about how we can be different, how I
Yeah.
see good in you still. And just really be present in those intentional
Yeah.
moments.
There are 1,000 people right now who want you to come to their house and model that because it sounds so good. When you were saying this, I was thinking about discipline. I was thinking about a previous conversation I'd had with, Meg Meeker on a podcast I was being interviewed on today. And we were talking about pornography and what do you do when you catch your kid,
Ooh, yeah, tough
your
one.
son is 9 and he gets online and he sees pornography. And in some ways, what you just said with discipline, remove, obviously, but reflect and reconnect means that actually that process of what are you going to do when you see that instead of, I heard about a man just recently who took the computer and broke it, and then he realized he just broke a $2,500 computer, and
Oh my.
he did it in anger. Well, how'd that feel for the kid? You know, Instead of totally freaking out, yeah, you remove that privilege, and all of
Hmm.
a sudden now there's all kinds of things going on with the computer that you're doing a filter, you're looking at their history, there's rules, but also you have to reflect because you want to teach them it's not that. That's
Hmm.
false intimacy. It's this, and you make it into really the conversation that you'd been wanting to have, or maybe you didn't want to have, but you need to have, on healthy sexuality and sexual integrity
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. And then
Hmm.
and then you're reconnecting even while you do that, and you're becoming a safe person. It's much easier to throw the computer. It's much easier to freak out, but it doesn't help the long term, is what I hear you saying with these 3 R's.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's our goal, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
even
So
mentioned at
good.
the front end is that we wanna raise healthy kids. So if
Yeah.
we are not teaching them to make these choices on their own, we're stunting them. We're
Yes.
creating immature children to go
Yeah.
into the world, and we don't want that for them.
No,
That's not loving them well.
no,
So
and
yeah, we gotta
they're
continue.
not gonna bottom line is they have to become responsible adults eventually, and they don't know how to do that.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Right, right. Okay, we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be right back. Wow, what a good conversation. Paige Clingenpeel. We all want her to come to our house and straighten us all out. Her podcast is called Embracing Your Season, Parenting the Littles and Understanding Teens. As I said, I love. I listen to it every week. And you can either watch that on the Homeward YouTube channel, or you can listen to it wherever podcasts are. And of course, you can also find out much more about Paige and her ministry at pageclingenpeel.com. By the way, that's the fault of that last name is her husband, Ryan, who brought that name to her. And if you can't spell it, all this information is on our show notes. We'll be right back. Hi, Jim Burns here from Homeward. There are so many great things happening at the Homeward Ministries. And you know what? The greatest thing is my new friend, Marcus Preciado, who is our new president, an incredible leader with great vision. And he's going to tell you a little bit about some of the new things.
Thanks, Jim. Everyone, so excited about what God has for us here at Homeward, and thank you for being a part of it as well. To give you a sneak peek of what's coming next year and beyond, we're going to be expanding our podcast team, bringing new voices and new faces. We're very excited about that as well. Also, Homeward Hubs. We're going to have feet on the ground in every region of the United States so we can have hands-on ministry and take Homeward to the nation, as well as establishing Project Homeward, which is going to be a resource like no other to help families succeed. So thank you for being supportive. Thank you for being part of a community. And as this year is ending, I want to encourage you to pray about generosity and being a part of what Homeward's doing, and we can partner together to help families succeed.
Welcome back. Paige Clingenpeel with us today. I'm smiling because I literally respect and admire this fine woman as much as anybody I know. We're talking about healthy discipline, creating character, developing responsibility, changing behaviors. Oh, we need more of this. Paige, it's always been so interesting to me that the root word for discipline is also for discipleship, you know,
Mhm.
and it's the same. And you actually say that healthy discipline equals healthy discipleship. What on earth did you mean by that?
Yeah. So, like you, I love digging deeper into the words and the
Mhm.
origin.
Yeah,
It's just so fascinating. So, the
yeah,
Latin root for discipline and discipleship
yeah.
is to learn and instruction and
Mm,
training. So,
okay.
both discipline and discipleship have the same goal: is to mature the listener. I think that's what we want as parents too. We want to mature our kids and grow them and teach them and coach them well. So, when we come alongside our kids, especially when they make mistakes, we get that opportunity to teach them a
Yeah,
new and better way to make
yeah.
choices.
It's a great way to
Now,
look at it.
through discipline, we are helping our kids develop the self control, learning empathy. I love that for my kids. Again, with my example earlier, it's like teaching them the empathy that they can have in the way that they interact with other
Mm,
people of
mm,
humanity. Well, this is exactly what Jesus did with his followers. He taught them, he corrected them, he challenged them. And then ultimately he gave him the final commission of take my teachings and share it with the world. And so, this discipleship, we get to do this not only ourselves, but we get to teach our kids about these things also and to be disciples of Jesus. I mean, how cool is that?
yeah. So in other words, what I hear you saying is we're the prime disciplinarians of our kids. That's natural. That's what parents do.
Mhm.
But we're also the prime disciplers, and that means coming alongside them, partly in the training. But you're kind of saying it's what I hear you saying is it's kind of the same thing in some ways.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It
New way
is.
of
It's
looking at discipline for me. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So again, our role as parents, I mean, we have been given these gifts. Now, they don't always feel like gifts when they're like one of our producers right now, the videography. I mean, he has a newborn, so he's not
Yes.
sleeping. So in the middle of the night, you're thinking, "Man, are you sure this is a gift, Lord?"
Hey, in the
Like,
middle of this podcast, he's falling asleep right now. I'm looking at him right here.
right?
Elijah's in my office. Yeah.
Poor guy,
Poor
right?
guy.
So it's
Poor
like
guy.
we have been blessed to have these children, but that also is a stewardship thing. And so
Yes.
we have to
That's
be
good.
good stewards of raising our kids up because we have them only for a short amount of time. And I view the idea of discipleship and discipline the same way that I view like school is that we can't learn all that we need
Mm,
in one day, 1 hour a week. There's
yeah.
just no way that we can
Right.
learn everything that we need. Well, the same thing goes for like discipleship with church. We can't expect our kids to
Right.
know all the ways of Jesus one day, 1 hour a week. And so
Right.
we have so many opportunities throughout the week, the day to dialogue, coach, answer questions throughout all of the times that we have with our kiddos for their spiritual formation as well as their behavior.
Yeah.
And so when my kids were younger, for instance, I wouldn't point out what would Jesus do because frankly, like that's a lot of pressure. What
Sure.
would Jesus do? He's
Sure.
perfect. I'm not
Right.
perfect.
Right.
So what I would do is I would say, what would Jesus say?
Mm,
Because that transforms everything in the
yeah.
way that we view it now. So
Yeah.
if Jesus would say, maybe you shouldn't say that to your brother because that would hurt his feelings. And I want you to love your brother well.
Yeah.
Now that's provided a different avenue for my
Right.
kids to respond
Right.
differently, you know, and then even discipleship and behavioral changes as they get older with teenagers. I love using day-to-day examples like TV shows or music.
Right.
You get to ask your kid, like, what does that song mean? Why is the show such a trendy show right now?
Right.
That allows them to critically think, is this good
Yeah.
for my brain? Does this
Yeah.
promote good behaviors? And now we're dialoguing about what
Right.
would Jesus say about this,
No,
right? So
I like that a lot, and I think sometimes Christians, I hope I know not you, and I hope not me, but I think sometimes Christians have used God as the great disciplinarian. God is gonna be angry at you for doing that,
oof, yeah.
and, talk
Yikes.
about putting pressure on somebody. when in fact, what I hear you saying is, no, you're doing the training process, and it doesn't have, like you said, please hear this, everybody who's listening or watching this podcast. It doesn't happen overnight,
Yeah, that's
right?
right.
You know, it's a process, and sometimes they're just about ready to launch, and it's still not working right, but you've tried your best. So sometimes good discipline and good parenting and good discipleship doesn't mean that all your kids are going to do this thing perfectly. You
Yeah.
used a phrase, Paige, and I love this phrase. You said, changing their heart means often changing their behavior. What did you
Hmm.
mean by that?
Yeah, gosh, I love this idea, and it's because God came up with it first,
Mhm.
right? When we surrender our lives to God, He does the transformational work
Yeah,
on
so
our
good.
hearts.
Yeah.
That then changes our worldview, the way that we interact with
Mhm.
humanity, the way that
Yeah.
we love our people well. So I love to have those conversations. For instance, I have a class that I teach young adults in high schools about being a disciple in today's culture. So
Mm.
we talk about hard stuff like LGBTQ and alcohol and dating and friendships. And
Right,
we
right.
really dig into the
Yeah.
scripture. But my favorite part is when we talk about the why behind God's decrees and rules,
Mm.
because that's when we get to know the heart of God. And when we understand the heart of God, that helps soften our hearts to follow his ways. So think through that. Like his rules are for our protection.
Yeah.
His design of this world is to create us into, well, not only his likeness, but also like into beautiful, united brothers and sisters of
Mm.
Christ. That's
Mm.
his design for us.
Right.
Instead of just looking at his rules of you can't do this and you shouldn't do this. And I mean, the Old Testament, I mean, it can be scary like that. It can be
Sure.
very overwhelming to look through
Sure.
those rules because we look at it outside of the context of his character.
Mm.
So the same thing happens when we discipline and when we teach, because we know God is the best heavenly father. So we'll use his example
Mm.
is that when we have rules inside our own home, we get to tell them the why behind those rules.
Yeah.
Do you think that I want to have all of these fights when my kids push the boundaries? No, I literally don't want to argue with my kids about keeping the rules. So we have the conversation of, I have this rule in place to protect you, to guard your heart, but more importantly,
Mm.
to raise you to be a healthy individual.
Yeah, it's
And
really
so it
good.
helps build up their skills and autonomy so that they
Yeah.
can go on.
Yeah.
But they need to know the why. Because if we don't know the why, then we're not going to be
Yeah.
motivated to
Yeah. And,
change.
and you're actually causing us to work harder. Because you
You're
can just stop it, quit hitting your brother, and then you slap your brother. You slap the kid. That,
exactly.
but what I hear you saying, you use the word guard. You actually, it's a scripture. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life.
Mhm.
And what I hear you saying is, and as I think about some of the incredible words of Jesus, but also in the Old Testament, as you mentioned, there are guardrails. So we need to
Mhm.
help them understand that God doesn't do this because he's the Grinch or because he's the bad guy or he wants you to be unhappy. He actually puts those guardrails because there are positive consequences if you live
Yes.
within those guardrails. And
Yes.
that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
again, he's our creator. He has created us. Now, we live in a fallen world. So there's things that we're going to want to do that
Yeah.
feel good in the moment, but are super temporary. I
Sure.
mean, that is the thrust of like toddlerhood, right? Just
Right.
being in the mood and the
Right.
vibe that is
Right.
being a toddler. But
Right.
we get to teach our kids that it is so much better when you abide by these things because
Yeah.
it's good for your heart, it's good for your
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just good overall for your body and soul.
Yeah.
So, us preaching that over and over again, as you said, it's going to take time. You're planting seeds. And I just pray you see the harvest before they leave, but sometimes you don't. And that can
Yeah.
be discouraging, but just know it's never in vain.
No,
Never in
no,
vain.
no, no. And, I that's really a great word because really good parents who do this stuff mainly right, none of us do it perfect. They have kids who sometimes are going to, color outside the rules and they're going to experiment and
Mhm.
they're going to do silly things. And we're like, we take it too personally. This is all,
Yeah.
this is about me. When in fact, they are human beings. They are sinful human beings at times. And we need to just understand that, just because we did it even, you know, 80% of the time, pretty good, 50% of the time, good, whatever it is,
Right.
they're still gonna mess up at times, and God's okay with messes. That's
That's
been my
right.
new phrase. I've been thinking a lot about that. I want you to play counselor for us. I mean, you're a therapist. People come in, yeah, I'm sure they lay down on the couch and ask you and talk about their when they were young. No, I'm kidding on that, of course. But when there's somebody here who's listening to this, maybe not just somebody, but a lot of people, and they say, "But you don't understand my kid. He or
Mm.
she they're extra tough. I mean, they are so strong-willed. They're driving me nuts. They are a big challenge.
Yeah.
And, so that works for my compliant child, what they're saying,
Mm,
but it
mhm.
doesn't work for, Miss or, Mr. in your face, you know, you're crazy mom, you're crazy dad type of thing. What do you say to
Yeah.
that parent?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I'm in the same boat. I mean, when you have 4 kids, you have to have one that at least, sticks their thumb out at your rules and challenges things because God really wants me to experience
It's
this so
nice
I can
that it's
speak
their thumb and not that other
authenticity.
finger that we could be
Right,
talking about.
right, thumb. I mean, that's the only one they have, right? Yeah, so I
Yeah.
have, a strong-willed child, which my husband says is just like me. So
Uh-huh.
again, that's sometimes how we have like the butting up against. But
Sure.
and we parent differently per child, per personality. And so that
Right.
was another thing that I think the Lord really taught me through the different
Mm.
personalities of my kiddos. But what I have found is that relationship and intentionality and connection, that's the key. So
Yeah.
maybe my child and I have had like a blow up because I put down structure and there was a consequence to a
Yeah.
decision that they made. And there was a reaction to that, and it wasn't a positive one. But I would always come back and say, let's reconnect. Let's
Yes.
have a conversation.
Yeah.
And I
Good.
wouldn't force it because they're the type that when you force things, then it gets harder.
Mhm.
So
Right.
what I find is carpooling, for instance, picking up at sporting events and just me and that child, we go and get a McDonald's milkshake. And we're
Yeah.
not even talking about anything that's of value or a
Yeah.
previous conversation, but
Yeah.
now it's just us just hanging out.
Yeah.
That is a connection piece that brings us back into the
Yeah,
unity of a
that's really good.
relationship.
And you talked about at the beginning, you used a phrase that you said it's on your podcast a lot, being present. And
Yes.
presence matters. And so what you're doing when you have the milkshake, besides putting
Mhm.
more calories in your body than you want,
It doesn't
um,
count though when it's in this
no,
context,
I get
right?
it. I get it. I get it. So, we know our producer Mike. He's lost 20 pounds, so he's trying to convince me to
Yep,
lose
yep.
20 pounds. So but he's not doing it with love. He's doing it with shame and mocking me. But that's another story. But what you're doing is you're building roots
Mhm.
into the relationship by just having a conversation about something that you're going, I'd like to talk about something more deeper, but
Yeah,
because you're having that milkshake, because you're having the conversation, because they know that you like them. Somebody
that's
once
right.
said, Donald Miller, a thinker said, you know, um, nobody's going to listen to you if they don't think you like them. And
That's
and I
right.
think and so with parents, a lot of times kids go, "My parents hate me," and
Mm.
because it's all they're saying is nagging or negativity or whatever, and what I hear you saying is, "No, you gotta build relationships." That's so good. I can't believe our time has gone by so fast. We could do this for another hour,
Oh, yeah, it would
and
be
I
fun.
want my listeners to know and hear more of you, and they can by going to Embracing Your Season, Parenting the Littles and Understanding Teens, with Paige Klingenpeel, a gifted communicator, all around great person. Honestly, I believe so much in the life and ministry of Paige, and she's just awesome. So I
Mm.
hope you'll look her up, listen to her podcast, subscribe to her podcast. It's well worth it. I love what she's said today and what she's doing, and the podcast is awesome. So take a look at that. Paige, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it was fun. Thank you,
Yeah, it
John.
went by so fast. Listen, before we go, I want to just say a few things about discipline and grace. And again, we didn't learn this stuff. I mean, we observed our parents. Some of them did it okay. Of us didn't do it okay. But the bottom line, again, is that you're not trying to raise obedient kids. Okay. You're actually trying to raise kids who will become responsible adults. Right. And so I've got a couple of points for you. One is rules, as Paige said this so well, rules without relationship equal rebellion. Okay. So that means we can't be too rigid or they're going to rebel, and relationship matters. So it's that, I'm giving you permission to go to McDonald's and get their milkshake or go someplace better to get a better milkshake, but that's my opinion. But lenient parenting also, then they're wandering, they're rudderless. Okay. So again, rules without relationship equal rebellion. So that relationship part. The other thing that I heard her say is choose your battles wisely, but you're the parent. So you're the authority. So you got to win the argument, but you don't win the argument by biting, hitting, biting. I started with the word biting. What is that? Hitting, yelling, doing whatever you do. Screaming, of course. You win the battle with leadership and authority. And you do that by actually, she used the word empathy. It's possible to lead with empathy. So you're saying things like, you know what, if I was your age, I'd feel the same way. Then there's another word, nevertheless. See, that puts you in control. Nevertheless, we're going to do it this way. Okay. And you know what? Life isn't fair. And, I get that, but life isn't fair. So you're going to have to learn that life isn't fair. Things like that. So that means you're choosing the battles, but you're going to kind of win the battle with your authority, not with him screaming, and please don't hear the word biting again. Oh my gosh. And then also nagging doesn't work. Negativity it just doesn't work. Even if constant criticism, even if it's true, it just doesn't work. Don't be afraid. This is part of discipline. Don't be afraid to admit your mistakes. You screamed at your kid. We're all did. So maybe you could say, you know what, buddy, that was all about me and that was not about you. And I've had a tough day, believe it or not. And somehow you hit a trigger in me. And you know what? That was mine. I need to apologize to you. Will you forgive me? That's good discipline because, as Paige was saying, you're moving them toward learning how to do this stuff. And then lastly is clearly express your expectations. You know what, kids, when I was doing some drug rehab intake, I did that years and years ago. I would ask, do you know what your parents want from you and what they expect from you? And they'd all go, no. And then I'd ask the parent, they go, of course they know. They know everything. And then come to find out, it was sometimes the parents didn't really know what was going on. So express your expectations. Do it not in the heat of the battle. Do it before, whenever you can. A key to good relationship and discipline is expressing expectations. And by the way, somebody once said, to be clear is to be kind. And so you want to be clear with your kids. And generally speaking, kids want to obey you, believe it or not. You might have that one child who you don't think does right now, but generally speaking, they do want to. So again, my thanks to Paige Clingenpeel. Don't forget to check out her website, PaigeClingenpeel.com. All of her information is in our show notes. Homeward also has a wonderful website, homeward.com, where there's lots of help for you. Thanks for listening. And if you're watching, thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Jim Burns.